Hey everyone, welcome to the KE Report and a company update from Newcore Gold. Chatting with Luke Alexander. Luke is the president and CEO of Newcore Gold. Company is traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol NCAU and on the OTCQX under the symbol NCAUF. Now, I wanted to get Luke on the show because the company has come out with a few pretty significant news releases over the last, let's say, month or so. The stock has been performing very well, especially in March. And again, I think that's on the back of some of these news releases. The company closed a $15 million financing that was originally announced for $12 million. They also increased the current drill program. Initially planned for 10,000 meters, now 35,000 meters, and have also released some more drill results. So, Luke, let's start with this financing because I think this really changes the time frame and the game plan that the company can have moving forward here. You raised $15 million. As I said, it was upsized. I also noticed in the news release that it seemed like there was a fair bit of institutional interest in that financing. Let's start there. Can you tell us at least some insights on the institutions that took part in that financing? Are they resource focused? Are they more generalists? And on the back end of that, in terms of resource funds, are they starting to see some inflows?
Yeah, hi Corey, and thanks for having me on. So, yeah, we went out to raise $12 million at the beginning of February. That was on the back of a very successful Indaba conference in South Africa, which is a conference we participate in every year. We then went to New York on the way back and had a couple of very large institutional investors there who we've been working and talking to for the last couple of years who expressed significant interest in becoming shareholders of Newcore. So on the back of that, we went out to raise $12 million. That was quickly oversubscribed, and we then increased it to $15 million so we didn't have to cut investors back significantly. So we had good participation from our existing shareholders as part of that financing, as well as a number of other institutional investors who we've been talking to for a number of years. In terms of the composition of specifically the institutional investors, which you were asking about, a number of them are long only precious metals and resource focused investors, as well as we had some generalist investing as well. So combination of both of those. As a general comment, I think the mood to start 2025, or at least in Q1 up until now, has been as positive as I can remember it in the last number of years. A lot of investors who we're meeting with are actively looking for new opportunities, or they're looking to deploy capital into companies that they currently hold, that they see the prospects for creating value as good. So yeah, 2025, it's been a great start to the year. And obviously we at Newcore are extremely well positioned. We have $17 million of cash in the bank. We then have another 14 million of options and warrants that are currently in the money. So that brings our kind of cash and cash equivalent to roughly $31 million. So we are very well financed to execute on converting from a PEA to a PFS, as well as continue to aggressively drill on the program and unlock some of that district scale exploration that we've got across our project.
Okay, and those are some of the key stepping stones, being that updated resource feeding into that PFS and all this drilling. But Luke, with this money that you have in the bank, those options that are in the money, what sort of run room does that give you time-wise to go through all of these catalysts?
So we've got, cash and cash equivalent to last us at least a couple of years. So we are very well positioned from that perspective. In terms of, the focus, we are focused on taking it from a PEA to a PFS. Look to get that PFS commissioned in the second half of this year and published in the first half of 2026. So we're financed to cover all of that work. You'll then also see that we announced an increase to our drill program. We took it from 10,000 to 35,000 meters. That was on the back of us closing the financing. So again, we're obviously fully funded to cover all of that exploration. And then as additional capital comes in from the exercising of warrants, and depending on what the market kind of sentiment is at that stage, we will potentially have the flexibility to increase our drill program beyond that 35,000 meters. So very well positioned in terms of the treasury and the ability to create a lot of value for shareholders through those various milestones that I just talked about.
All right, let's talk about this expanded drill program. Then, last time I had you on the show, mid-January, we were talking about that initial 10,000 meter program, how you were really, it seemed like, focused on upgrading some of those ounces of that 1.7 million ounce resource from inferred up to indicated so they can be used in that pre-feasibility study. With this additional 25,000 meters, a couple things stuck out to me. We'll go through them one by one. One being deeper drilling. You've mentioned a lot of times on this show that the resource areas are all open at depth. It sounds like you're going to be doing some more of that deeper drilling. Can you give us a lay of the land there?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I would highlight and is when we talk about deeper drilling, we're still only down at kind of 200 to 300 meters below surface. If you look at the average vertical depth of the pits that constrains our resource today, those pits average 75 meters. The average depth of the drilling is down around 100 meters. So, there's an opportunity for us to continue to chase these high grade structures that we've identified on our property to depth as well as along strike. So that's something, when you look at the greenstone hosted deposits that sit along the Sefwi-Bibiani belt from us, including Chirano with a historical endowment of 5.5 million ounces, Bibiani at 6.5 million, and Newmont's a Ahafo mine sitting at 20 million ounces. A lot of these greenstone deposits, when you start to identify the high grade feeder zones that extend at depth, that's where you can really start to grow the overall size and increase the grade of the ounces. So that's something that, yes, we are, looking forward to doing follow-up drilling on. And I think that's one of the, again, real advantages we've got at Newcore is the fact that we've, now completed over 200,000 meters of drilling across the property. We've identified a number of these very prospective high-grade areas that sit on our project. And it's really just a matter of us getting back in there and systematically stepping out and continuing to chase these structures. We've also, almost equally important, is we've identified, a few areas that we don't necessarily want to go back to. These high-grade structures don't exist across every single area, and that's the case, again, at Chirano, Bibiani, Ahafo. But once you start to hone in on where these high-grade structures are, that's something that we're obviously very excited about following up on. And if you look at the results we've been putting out over the last 6 months, you'll see a number of very nice high-grade intercepts. I mean, we actually back in Q4 put out our highest grade meter intercept ever on the project, 204 grams over a meter. If you look at within that same press release, 3.4 grams over 28 meters, but within that 37 grams over 2 meters, and that's only about 125 meters below surface. So, those are the kind of high grade results that we're obviously excited about continuing to follow up on and ultimately look to grow the overall mineralized footprint within those areas.
Okay, you got to those high grade areas. So let's talk about those because kind of a results recap so far. The company's released just over 10,000 meters of drilling from this current program. My takeaway was you continue to hit these consistent long intervals with some of these high grades showing up. Can you give us a number in terms of how many high grade areas you have? Any ones that are truly a priority that you think really can move the needle in terms of future economics? Just any more information on these high grade areas? Again, how many, where they are?
So one way to answer that is if you look at the last resource that we put out, we actually put out a small high grade underground resource as part of that update. And really, the motivation for that was to highlight that, look, we've identified where some of these high grade feeder zones exist. similar to the other deposits that I mentioned along the Sefwi-Bibiani belt from us. And, if you look at that resource in a little bit more detail, you'll see that we put out 3 high-grade underground resource areas. So that'd be, one way of looking at it is obviously all 3 of those areas are areas that we can go back and systematically step out along strike and continue to chase those structures and look to grow the overall mineralized footprint of that higher grade material. But then we've identified and had, a number of other high grade drill intercepts across the project that will ultimately warrant follow-up drilling, as we get the diamond drill rig going and look to target some of these deeper structures.
Let's also talk about what is, I think, in addition to this increased drill program. And these are some of the, let's say, earlier stage exploration targets. You're calling them pre-resource targets. Any insights on what these are and when you might start drilling these?
So I would put it into 2 buckets, and maybe I'll just start at a high level. So we've got a very large land package, 248 square kilometers in size. If you look at the second and third order splays or structures that run through our property, we've got over 100 kilometers of strike going through our project. We've identified roughly 25 targets to date, of which we've drilled on 9 of them, and only 5 of them make up our current resource. So outside of those 5 that we've identified, that we've wrapped resources around, I mean, all of those do remain open along strike and at depth. So continuing to explore in those resource areas is something that's a high priority for us. But we then have 4 additional areas that we've drilled on, put 2 to 5,000 meters into these areas, made discoveries, but haven't done enough drilling yet to identify a large enough mineralized footprint to wrap a resource around it. So those 4 areas include Aradi, Kojina Hill, Naquanta, Sium South. Those are areas that we will want to go back, do additional drilling, look to grow the overall size of the mineralized footprint with the goal of then over time wrapping a resource around those, around those discoveries. So that's an area that we will look to expend some meters on and do some drilling. And then beyond that, we've got another 15 odd targets that we've identified on the project that are at various stages. So, we may be soil sampling or doing some trench work or some airborne geophysics. So that's work that we continue to do as well to then look to prioritize which targets we want to put in the queue from a drilling perspective. So, previously drill tested areas, discoveries have been made, follow-up drilling will be something we look at, and then obviously new target areas is something that we're obviously, excited about and have in the overall queue of exploration that we want to do on the project. And this again is when we talk about district scale, it encompasses all of these opportunities that sit across our Enchi project.
All right. Luke, thanks for going over all this. We've covered a lot here, and with that fundraising, the company really can focus on, again, upgrading the resource, testing some of these new targets, testing at depth, isolating those high-grade areas. Can you give us a lay of the land then in terms of time frame? What sort of news should we be watching out for? And with that PFS that you've said will get underway in the second half of this year, you will need to cut off drilling at some point. So when do you think that drilling cutoff could be for that updated resource?
Yeah, so I think it's important to highlight what, you mean from a cutoff perspective. I mean, we don't ever need to cut off drilling in the sense that we need to stop drilling because, we obviously have a very strong treasury to continue to aggressively drill across the project. I guess the cutoff becomes a date that, up until that point, the drilling that's been completed can then go into an updated resource, which then can go into the PFS. But there's nothing to stop us continuing to aggressively drill, beyond that date and continue to get good results out to the market. So, our plan is to continue to drill right through the commissioning of the PFS and right up until, once we've published the PFS and beyond that. So our goal is to always be drilling on the project, but yes, there will be a cutoff date in terms of what actually goes into the numbers for an updated resource. So I think that's just important to qualify there. And then, from a news flow perspective, I mean, if you look at the results that we've put out over the last few months, we typically put results out every, call it 4 to 6 weeks. We'll get batches of results back. We'll compile those into a news release and get them out to the market. Given the strength of our treasury today and the 35,000 meter drill program that is underway, we're expecting to have drill results right through the end of this year and into next year. So we will have a lot of news flow, which is something that we're obviously very excited about. And then in the background, we're also doing a lot of other work that is part of the work required to take us from a PEA to a PFS, so hydrological work, geotech work. We're doing a little bit of additional met test work, environmental and baseline. We're doing a bit of additional work on that front. So all of those things will ultimately, then feed into that PFS. So we'll have lots of news flow in 2025, and it's been an extremely busy start to the year, and we expect that to continue, which is great.
All right. Thank you very much for the update here, Luke. Again, Luke Alexander, President and CEO of Newcore Gold. Click the links in the show notes to visit the company's website, read over the recent news, and please email me any questions you have for Luke for future interviews when we recap some of the drilling and any other news that comes out of the company. Luke, thanks again for your time today.
Thanks a lot, Corey.